The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good day, I should say, because we've got a truly global audience here with us today. I'm speaking from the north of England. My name is Steve Gladwin, Director of Nodus Solutions, and also the Chair of the IWFM International Special Interest Group, known to many as the ISIG. So welcome to the fourth webinar in the IWFM's Turbulent Times series. So far in this series, we have explored different aspects of the global impact that COVID-19 is having on us in a workplace and also from a personal perspective. Today, as a special day, we mark World FM Day. And so today, in line with the theme of World FM Day, celebrating our environment, we want to pull the focus back a bit from the immediacy of the lockdown and explore whether some of the impacts of COVID-19 are having in the world of FM. We've called this episode Net Zero and Sustainability in a Post-COVID World, Opportunities and Implications for Workplace and FM. And today, as we begin to turn our attentions to the post-lockdown phase and switching the economy back on, we're going to explore some of the wider questions that arise in this new world. Specifically, the climate and sustainability commitments that were on everybody's mind before this pandemic hit. I'm joined by 5 guests today, each one of them involved in the environment and sustainability matters in some way. Some in the workplace, some in the facilities sectors, others not. And I want to explore with them some of the questions that arise as we navigate our way through the other side of this crisis and focus on another global challenge. So if I could introduce our attendees today, in addition to myself, we've got Nigel Lucker. And Nigel is the head of property for CND, and Nigel sits with me on the ISIG and has very much put this panel together. Also, I have Anne Beavis, head of sustainable development for Crown Workplace. I have Greg Davies, chair of the IWFM Sustainability SIG and also director of Assurity Consulting. I have Pete Nisbet, Director of Energy from the Mitie Group. And finally, Toby Morgan, LED Program Manager from the Climate Group. What I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists today just to give a 3-minute overview of their background and also their views. And I'd like each one of them to talk for a couple of minutes about the subject area and perhaps give their prediction on whether they support the view that this is either a major reset opportunity for us to get serious about climate goals and whether the profession can really step up in the area of sustainability to help organisations, and an even bigger challenge than before because the impact of the pandemic on the economy means that we're going to be very much focused on cost issues. So is this going to help us with sustainability, or is the cost issues and the issues that we're going into a massive area of economic uncertainty, will that compromise the whole situation? So if I could ask Anne to kick off, and Anne, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. So, hi, my name's Anne Beavis, and I've worked in the sustainable service development for over 20 years. In that time, mainly focusing on working with organisations that provide services to the workplace sector. And I was engaged by Crown Workspace, who are previously known as Premier Workplace Services prior to their acquisition, to develop more sustainable services to support workplace change. And for those of you who don't know Crown Workspace, they're part of the global Crown family, and they provide support for organisations that are moving, refurbishing or changing their workplace. And in recent years, we've developed more circular economy focused services for the resale, donation and refurbishment, remanufacturing of office furniture and IT and AV equipment. I'm part of the IWFM Sustainability SIG and have been for a number of years. And I also sit on the Circular Economy Task Force for business in the community. But my personal mission is to really try and help organisations deliver better business. And by that, I mean delivering the goods and services in a way that minimises environmental harm and delivers social good, providing a more economically sustainable business growth. So in answer to your question, Chris, you won't be surprised to know that I see what is happening right now as a real opportunity. I mean, there are clearly huge, tragic, personal and devastating economic losses being felt by the whole of society, and nothing that I reference undermines that. But climate change is presenting potentially much greater risks, with predictions of hundreds of thousands of people losing their lives through natural disasters and global disruption. So we saw before COVID that business and investors and the wider public were already starting to pay much more attention to sustainable business practices. And this was also reflected in the investment community, looking to exit investments that presented a higher sustainability risk. And large corporate organisations have already made their public pledges to their own net zero targets. I'm not sure who still believes in the economic model of excess consumption and waste that we've just paused. So I recognise that adding a need to change for the FM industry and the return to work makes it more challenging. And I recognise that there is also a greater cost of not doing so. I see FMs as having a unique opportunity now to help reimagine the world and align the return to work to these longer term sustainability challenges that help protect all our futures. And so that challenge to the workplace and FM sector is considerable, but I think it's an exciting chance for FM to impact more than ever before, perhaps, and to show leadership in their sectors. And that really, Steve, is my opening gambit on this.
Okay, thanks, Anne. We'll come back to you on that. Very opportunistic position, I would say. An opportunity for FMs to make a big difference. Handing over now to Greg Davies, who's the chair of the IWFM Sustainability SIG and also Director of Consulting at Assurity. Greg.
Hello, thanks Steve. Good afternoon everybody and happy World FM Day. I am Greg Davies. I am a Director of Market Development at Assurity Consulting and the current chair of the IWFM Sustainable Special Interest Group. I'm also a specialist member of the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management. My background is I'm a degree qualified microbiologist and I've spent the last 30 years working in health, safety and environmental compliance management, covering areas such as Legionella, general health and safety, fire, asbestos, elements such as building environment quality, so air and water quality within buildings, as well as, of course, energy, waste and sustainability. Having a past on subjects ranging from water management to the red tape challenge, and indeed the CRC, for anybody who remembers, the climate reduction. I've spoken at various events, but also been involved with organisations such as DEFRA, Public Health England, DEC, as was the Committee on Climate Change, SIBSI, and of course the IWFM, of which one of the elements I've been involved in is the lead on the Sustainability in FM survey for the last 7 years. It's been running for over a decade now, where we gather information from the industry on their views where we are with sustainability. As far as answering your question, Steve, this current pandemic has been it's a challenge as well as an opportunity for sustainability, because what this crisis has done is actually give us a live scenario examination of ethics, of resilience, of governance and of integrity at an individual organisational level, but also nationally and internationally. And these effects, as Anne said, we are going to see long beyond the initial consequences of the virus. But we've also seen other things. We've been reminded of the value of elements such as health and well-being. I mean, the question that everybody asks now, how are you? I think people mean when they're asking how are people, and also the value of those who support us when we need it. We've seen communities locally and internationally come together and start to share on what can be done about vaccine trials or what can be done about testing. We've seen very much innovation and agility and adaptability in our workplace, with not just in terms of what normal means, but in people repurposing to make ventilators or make masks or those things that we need shortly. Who would have thought it would take a pandemic, unfortunately, but we've seen IT and corporate real estate and FM and HR all actually integrate and start to work collaboratively, which has to be a good thing. But we've also recognised that you know we've come to a point where you couldn't access things, and things stopped and the world changed. Initially, it was toilet rolls and pasta, but then rapidly that expanded to not being able to go out, and concerns that everybody had in what can we access now, and how do we go about our days as normal. Problem with the pandemic, though, is that the likelihood and risk of it was known. Yeah, at a company, national and international level, with very, very few exceptions, we were best underprepared, or more uncomfortably, maybe a more uncomfortable truth is that perhaps we had the priorities wrong. You know, tragic and heartbreaking it is, but as of yesterday, there were 4 million cases of COVID-19 globally, and just under 300,000, 278,000 people have died as a result of it. You know, it's caused significant issues with workplace, marketplace, environment, and society, if we look at it from a corporate social responsibility perspective. But also drawing on a point Anne made, with regards to some of the wider issues we need to be considering now and in the future, more than 5 million people die each year from diseases caused by unsafe drinking water, lack of sanitation, and insufficient water for hygiene purposes. And the WHO also estimate that another 4.6 million people die each year from causes directly attributed to air pollution. So while COVID-19 is acting as a polarizer currently for where we are, there are much bigger things we need to be looking at, and we need to learn these lessons, because climate change and the effects of it are again predictable. So we cannot afford to be unprepared, and we need to be thinking now and what we can apply from what we're learning going through this to how we can make on an individual, national and an international basis our planet more resilient to what we have to come.
Okay, thanks very much, Greg, for those opening remarks. An opportunity, I hear, for collaborating, preparing more, and we'll come back to all of those points. But we'll hear now from Toby Morgan, who's LED Program Manager for the Climate Group. Toby, over to you.
Great, thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you're tuning in from. I'm Toby Morgan, the LED Programme Manager at the Climate Group. I've been working in the energy sector for about 12 years now, both for non-profits and in local government, and I've got a particular interest in how buildings can affect the health and well-being of occupants. So some of you may have heard of the Climate Group, but we're an international NGO. We're headquartered in London, and we work with business and government leaders around the world to accelerate climate action. And firstly, I'd like to thank the IWFM for inviting me to speak. It's a real pleasure to be involved and meet all your members on this World FM Day, so that's really good. And we're really pleased to announce our partnership with IWFM, and we're going to be talking more about these really important issues of climate change, sustainability, especially in the built environment. The Climate Group have got a number of different corporate campaigns working with businesses to encourage the adoption of renewable energy, energy productivity measures, electric vehicles, and LED lighting as well. Obviously, as Anne mentioned previously, and Greg, that this is a hugely challenging time for businesses and for everyone, but also we can see it as a really good opportunity as well. And many of the leading companies and different organisations around the world have called for a green recovery. And I think one of the really key words that people have mentioned already is resilience. So how can we see this to reset things, to look into different ways of doing things within our buildings and really improve that resilience in our buildings, in our companies. How we can see it as an opportunity as well is that now can be a really good time to look at building efficiency and our existing systems and setups in our buildings, because currently, you know, lots of buildings are completely unoccupied, some at very low occupancy rates. So how can we look at our systems now and see where we can change things before we go back to, you know, normal, as it were, in the coming months? And also, obviously, we know that facilities managers not only look at the physical structure of the building, they've also got a key role to play in the human aspect of buildings as well. And that's one thing that we've got to remember. And, you know, FMs provide safe, efficient and pleasant working environments for all building occupants. And in my role as the LED program manager, I'm particularly interested in that, obviously, and how we can look at smart connected LED lighting systems. And that really fits into the built environment, but also the human aspect as well. So obviously you get the huge energy savings, but then using connected LEDs, we can also look into opportunities for interoperability with other building systems, and also things like personalization for employees, hopefully leading to improved staff productivity and well-being. And one of the climate group's other initiatives is called EP100, where we get companies to use energy smartly. So they're actually decreasing their energy demand whilst also offering business improvements. And when we look at energy efficiency and energy productivity, it can often be forgotten about talking about climate change initiatives. So often the headlines are about renewable energy and solar panels and, you know, all that good stuff. But energy productivity, a lot of the boring behind the scenes things can be really important in hitting our climate change goals. And it's estimated that energy productivity improvements can generate around 40% of greenhouse gas emissions that were needed to get to a 1.5 degree world. And it's really great that we've got Mitie on the call today as well, who are a recent joiner of EP100, and they're also member of our other corporate campaigns as well. So really congratulate Mitie and to Pete on the call for them showing leadership in this area. So yeah, looking forward to talking more about this with all the panelists. Thanks for inviting me again, and please drop me an email afterwards if you'd like to hear any more about the climate group's work. Back to you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Toby, and that's a good segue into our final panelist today, Pete Nisbet, who's the Managing Director of Mitie Energy. So, Peter, over to you.
Thanks very much, Steve. Hi, everyone. Happy World FM Day. As I said, I'm MD of Mitie Energy, part of the Mitie Group. For those that aren't aware of Mitie, we're one of the UK's biggest FM businesses. Mitie Energy, you know, we provide services for energy and sustainability solutions to large end users. I guess, you know, along with the panel, we kind of look back in experience, and I've been in the energy and sustainability industry for more years than I care to remember, but over 20 years. I think it would be fair to say over that period of time, I've seen an evolution of the market. I would say at the starting point, and very much price focused into the commodity element of the energy bill, which made up the majority of the energy bill at that point, and then a transition into volume and volume management, and very much about kind of dealing with the cost, the forever increasing cost issue that we find within the energy sector, where you have the non-commodity, so the taxation element of the bill growing as the infrastructure changes, the variability of demand and generation changes over time, and therefore the carbon agenda kind of gets pushed through for renewables a bit more, and we find that the bills have increased significantly over that time. So volume becomes a big play. And then kind of thirdly, you're looking from a carbon point of view, and we're definitely seeing the drive from a carbon side of things, and very much in the last couple of years, if not if not for the last, really accelerating in the last year with the drive for zero carbon targets. We've seen a lot of corporates publish them, as was stated earlier on, and set some pretty challenging targets. 2025 is the new. We ourselves at Mitie have launched our zero carbon target called Plan Zero in February of this year, with a target of 2025. So plenty of people putting targets out there, but the one thing that we've learned is that you have to have a plan. And since the lockdown, I guess we're kind of going into the question of risks or opportunities. And I think there are kind of three key areas that you've got to look at here. One is actually about knowing your position. Do you know your position? And what I mean by that is understanding your buildings, your assets, what your people are doing, who's driving where, etc., and really understanding that benchmark position. And then it's about the quality of the data that you have and making sure that you really are connected into your buildings, connected into your manufacturing lines, and really, once again, understanding when you're making changes, what is the reaction of the asset? Is it good or is it bad? If you're implementing a project, is the output good or bad? Was it what you thought, or does it need to be changed? And then about having a plan. So making sure that you do have a plan and it's been signed off at the right level and it's got the senior engagement within the organisation. Now, if you take all of those three elements together, depending on how you attack that, and depending on how you grab the nettle, as it were, I think will determine as to whether it is an opportunity or a risk. For those that do grab hold of this, understand the position, have data at the core, and have the senior sign-off, you can see this as a very big opportunity to really drive forward. For those that believe that it can kind of sleepwalk into the targets that have been set, I think there are some really big risks, and therefore exposing for not hitting targets. Back to you, Steve.
Okay, thanks very much, Pete. That's a very good set of opening remarks from our four key panelists. Now, we won't have a roving mic on today, but what we're going to do is take questions from anyone that's joining the call. We've got several hundred people, and I've already started to see some questions coming in, one specifically for Anne. But before I go to Anne, Pete, I just wanted to come back to you in relation to those three key pieces of advice. Know your current position, the quality of the data, and then having a plan. All four panelists have spoken about the opportunity, and I heard you mention about Mitie's position, that in February you launched your 2025 target of being zero carbon. February seems a long while ago now. With all of these opportunities that our four panelists have talked about, do you see an opportunity of resetting that target, Pete?
I think, as you say, February February feels like a long time ago. I think 2025 is a target that we've set, and it's a challenging target, and one that we really want to be hitting. And I think it's about being coordinated and making sure that you're hitting these timelines and going through these certain gates that you've got. One of the points that was made earlier by Toby is about joining EV 100, RE 100, and EP 100, and that is one of the targets that we've set, and then we're driving forward off that. I think we have a plan in place, and we have a structured plan with the engagement from our senior team, and making sure that we're delivering that. I think a 2025 target and being organised and coordinated is a solid target to be getting to. I think we will review that over time, obviously, but at the moment, I think nothing has changed from that point of view. But it is making sure that, and it's not just from Plan Zero point, but all corporates. It's making sure you've got the right structure in place to keep on track for these targets, and that's one of my big concerns about people just assuming, with the changes that we've had over the last couple of months, that it's an easy thing to do. This is a short-term boost, but there are still challenges that need to be brought forward. And as I say, you can't sleepwalk into these targets.
Indeed, indeed. So I wanted to focus now specifically on what specific lessons we can learn from this crisis, perhaps in terms of behavioural change. I know Greg mentioned well-being, but specific lessons learned. And I'll kind of throw in a question that we've already received from Kevin Stanton, directed towards Anne, in relation to the move to digitising processes. Will that be something that's moved up the priority list as opposed to utilising manual paper-based tasks? So if I could ask each of the panellists what specific lessons we can learn, but over to you, Anne, with that specific question about digitisation.
Well, I think certainly in terms of moving to, more online working, it's something that we've become much more engaged with on a daily basis. And I suppose that in terms of digitisation of processes, that's something that naturally will follow. Some organisations would have had those systems in place already, and others have had to rush to try and work out ways, be it getting documentation sign off, be it looking and reviewing different items that would have normally happened in a sort of live working environment. I think those kind of, similar to lots of different workplace activities that were based around people being together, having this spotlight put on these working practices and how they can be carried out remotely. Digitisation will be a route that a lot more people will be seeking to explore and have explored. So I think it will form definitely part of more working practice moving forward. I'm be interested to see what the other panelists think.
Very good. I'll hand over to Greg now, because the lessons learned, Greg, in relation to behavioural change, I think you mentioned seeing more collaboration between HR, corporate real estate, IT and FM, and also just the well-being agenda. So specific lessons that we'll learn from this from you, Greg.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think trying to tie that up with one or two of the other points on measuring and where we are. If we take the Sustainability in FM survey from 2018-2019 and look at elements, so this is a survey. It's hundreds of people responded back, gathering information on service level agreements, KPIs. So where there were specific measurements in place for different elements of sustainability. And I'll just read you some of those that have been impacted, and certainly where our behaviours have changed in the last 6 to 8 weeks over COVID-19. So to tie that point in, health and safety, carbon and energy management, training and development, equality and diversity, water management, staff recruitment and retention, health and well-being, sustainable travel, workplace environmental design, which of course is very topical at the moment, and flexible working. So they were my list. Yet of that whole list of all the organisations that responded, only 3 of them did more than 50% of the organisations have any formal measurement in that they were reporting on, and that was health and safety, that's always been top, carbon and energy management, and training and development. Yeah, it's that list going down to elements such as health and well-being, recruitment and retention of staff, sustainable travel, workplace environment design and flexible working. Less than 20% of organisations had any formal information on it. So at this point, as far as behavioural change goes, is looking at where are we currently, what have we done, and what can we learn to apply that to the future. This good for the business and good for environment. What can we learn where we can build in more sustainability to what we're doing and actually measure it, so we know where the position we're going from. We can mark that point and look at how we then build on that in terms of how we reconfigure our workplaces and what we do in the future.
So just to be clear on that, Greg, you're saying that there's empirical data from the sustainability survey that suggests that FMs have not got the data.
They have to varying degrees, yeah. So, for example, if you take health and safety, over 70% of responders had formal information on, so either SLAs, KPIs, they were measuring it and had figures they could put back into the business. The same with carbon and energy, the same with training and development. But less than 20% of them had, for example, workplace environment design and flexible working. Sustainable travel was less than 20%, and that's going to be a key focus as we get back to work in how do we remobilize our workforce so that we can get them to wherever they need to go in the future for whatever the new normal will be. And yeah, it is an area we need to be looking at. It's gathering more information.
Okay, I'm gonna throw over to Pete again on that one, because point number 2 that Pete made, who is 3 recommendations. Know the current position, but then have quality data. And I'll come back to Toby, but Pete, there's also a question about what's the hardest thing. This has come from Dave Tarbuck. The hardest thing for FM providers to tackle for zero carbon. So I'll come over to you, Pete, just in relation to that specific question. What's the hardest thing for FM providers to tackle this zero carbon issue, and maybe link that in with Greg's comment about the data?
Yeah, so I think, so thanks for that. So I think it's really interesting. I think if you think about the most important tool, and Greg's got a really good point there. The most important tool we have to us is solid lines of data. My belief is that that as we move through these times, obviously, cost is going to be a real focus for a lot of large corporates, but actually that puts pressure on any business case that's presented in front of any senior manager to sign off. And it's got to have absolute data at the core. We do not want to be going down dead ends by pushing business cases that do not have great kind of, paybacks, both from an energy and also from a carbon point of view. And so therefore it has to be backed up by absolute solid data. And I think, I just look at the connectivity that we talk about and making sure that all buildings are connected in the right way, and you've got the right technology, but you've got a real understanding for the rhythm of the business. And if you've got that, you can make real decisions, real business decisions, and real sustainability decisions as well. And that is absolutely key, because the wastage, we do not want wastage, more so than ever before. And we can't, as a kind of global community, really keep on wasting money on cases that do not return what is required. Now, that's one point. So the data absolutely is key, and it is one of the most important things that we need. So we need to have solid lines of data coming through from every asset that we're looking at. But a really interesting point that we see when we're talking to corporates about delivering sustainability strategies at the hearts and minds side as well. And you've got to bring workforces on board to really deliver this. So you have a plan signed off by senior managers, key stakeholders, but then it's about really winning on the communities within the corporate as well, and getting the hearts and minds really believing that this is going to be delivered. And you can do that by obviously showing the evidence of what you've delivered as well. So to me, it's twofold. It's really, really solid data, and then really proving that to whether it be the key stakeholders or the wider community within that business that this is how it's working and it is working.
Okay, I'm going to throw over to Toby now. And Toby, just got a different proposition to you. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but we've had a degree of optimism from the panelists about this is going to be very much an opportunity. But if I think about many program changes, they need some cash. And just picking up on a question that we've had from Jade Boggust, she's made a very pertinent comment about potential cash restrictions. So if cash is going to be tight as a result of the economic pain that we're going to feel over the next several years, do you think that that's going to have a negative impact on some of the programs that you would have liked to have seen happening maybe 6 months ago? Toby, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, really interesting question, and I'd really like to just echo what Pete said there. From having that data is key. If you don't know what's going on in your buildings, then it's difficult to change things. So having good quality data, but not just having data for data's sake, it's actually what you do with that data. So that was just a quick point on that. But yeah, I totally get it. With the upfront capital costs, they can be quite large for any of these types of programs. But what we're seeing, it's a similar situation with COVID and with climate change as well. The upfront costs now will probably pale into insignificance if you do nothing now, and then you'll hit further down the line in months or years down the line. So you can see this as a real investment opportunity. I know it can be difficult, and obviously C-suite people, your finance director is probably occupied with other things at the moment, but you can really see this as an opportunity. But some companies are going to struggle with those upfront CapEx costs. What we're seeing more of now is some companies and services that offer energy efficiency as a service or lighting as a service and things like that. So that in some ways can get around these issues of the upfront capital costs. If you're paying a company to come and sort all these issues out in your building for them, they pay for the upfront capital costs, and then you're paying for the service, hopefully resulting from the energy savings coming from those improvements anyway. So I think there's a few different ways around it. And obviously lots of members, lots of people listening in on the call as well will have issues around landlord and tenant problems as well. So often, it's the tenants that want to improve the buildings, but they're not the ones in control of, they're not the landlord sometimes. So there's specific issues around that. And that's one of the things we try and engage with both landlords and tenants in the work that the climate group do. But I think it's, as I mentioned in my little summary at the start, it's a really good time to look into these things. If your buildings are underoccupied at the moment or unoccupied, a lot of the data coming out is that energy bills have come down slightly, but actually not that much at all. I think there was some research coming from the US that said on average building energy has only gone down about 16% in the last few months, even though often there's absolutely no one in there. So this would ring alarm bells that there's something going on in the building. There's high base loads in there. What's going on there? So I think it's a really great time to kind of get in there, examine the data, like everyone's been saying, and really dig down into how we can lower those base loads, because often there'll be systems and processes running that you're not even aware of. So that data and that monitoring is really key. But I think we have to frame it in the opportunistic way and say, there are high upfront capital costs, but the cost of doing nothing will be a lot more in the long run. So that's how we need to frame it.
Very good. And a good point, Toby, about different business models like lighting as a service. I do think that will create an opportunity for some organisations, many organisations, for maybe changing the frame a little bit about certain business models. I wanted to take the discussion on in relation to the real estate and the way that we've kind of changed our behaviours in relation to working from home. It's been forced upon us, and we've had a number of questions that have come in from our several hundred attendees around the world. So I'm going to put Anne back on the spot, because some of the questions we've had, Joanne Walker has asked, do we see companies achieving carbon savings through the rationalisation of their estates? We've also had a similar question about reduction of portfolios from Pat Gurin in Ireland. What's the impact going to have on our overall estate footprint? And I know personally, working at home has been a challenge at times, but I've also enjoyed not having to schlep down to London on a weekly basis. I'm based up in the north of England. So, Anne, how do you see this all panning out in relation to our real estate portfolio? And is this an opportunity for reassessing our overall real estate?
Thanks for that, Steve. I think this is a a question that everybody's asking right now, and to be honest, I wouldn't claim to know the answer. I think anyone who does would probably find that there's several different opinions about that. I, as someone who's always worked from home, or more recently has worked from home pre-COVID for at least 60% of my time, I was aware of a lot of the personal benefits from working from home. But by no means do I think it's, my own personal view is that I don't think it's necessarily going to be something that's going to be in the best in the long term for everybody. You know, there are considerations about working from home, looking after staff well-being, looking at the ergonomics for the staff, looking at some of the, you know, some of the social isolation that can happen. So I think home working has been fantastic for the environment, and actually technology has enabled us to carry on many jobs as normal. But then when looking at the future of that in relation to the real estate and then the benefits, obviously a great deal more planning has to take place to understand how much work is it going to be optimal for people to do remotely. What kind of work patterns can we put into place to ensure that the right amount of connectivity between employees can still happen? And I think ultimately those kinds of questions might be phased, because what's going to happen in the next 6 months could be different from the next 12 months. In reality, until we have come to a better understanding about the long-term effects of COVID and if there's a vaccine created, until that time where we've got that longer term view, there might be some interim arrangements made. And I think if we can look at how we use our buildings more effectively and more creatively, there's some really good things that we can do to reduce the carbon within them, and also the resources that we use within them. We can start asking ourselves, what are the resources we're using? How long are we using them for? What are they made of? And make some questions about not just the building itself, but the resources that we use in them. We were just talking about possibility of leasing, lighting, and other circular economy model solutions. And I think those sorts of solutions and mindsets, when they're applied to building space and how they can be used flexibly, how they can be used differently, will then help feed into the plans. I don't know the answer to the, you know, to the real estate reduction outputs that will be necessary in the longer term, but I certainly think there's room to use the workplace more creatively, and there will be resulting carbon savings from that, hopefully.
Very good, Anne. And I think that reinforces Pete's position about knowing the current position and understanding all of the current position in relation to the workplace, the travel, and everything. And I'm going to come back to Pete in a minute, just to
Steve,
ask whether.
Could I chip in on that point as well, if possible, quickly?
Is that Pete?
It's Toby.
Toby, go for it, Toby.
Yeah, just to back up what Anne said, I think that's really true what she said, and having that monitoring. So in my work as the LED program manager, there's some really clever systems now where you can have inbuilt proximity sensors, motion sensors, occupancy sensors and things like that. And I was actually on a webinar on Monday that we put on, and we worked with Signify, the lighting provider, and they were saying they did some work with Deloitte in one of their offices, and basically from the data they gathered from these occupancy sensors, worked out that they were using their 2 satellite offices hardly at all, and the main office wasn't being used effectively. So they basically closed down 2 satellite offices and moved everyone into the main office. So instantly, that's kind of a huge saving. So I think just really simple, even occupancy surveys, things like that, you can use that data so effectively and realize you actually don't need so much space that you think you need.
Oh, very good. And I agree with you, Toby. I had a client last week actually saying, actually, we don't need all of this space. We've managed over the last several months, people working at home. We're going to use this as a catalyst for change. And I'm reminded by Kevin Stanton, who's just put a note on the questions about Twitter announcing that they'll be allowing their workers to work remotely forever. So there is a common consensus among our audience that perhaps there is going to be a reduction in office space, and we've done okay in relation to working at home. That seems to be the consensus. So could I throw over to Greg now and just ask from a risk perspective, Greg, where you see these challenges presenting themselves if there is this move to more working from home, freeing up some capital in relation to real estate, where do you see the risks? Greg Davies from Assurity.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Well, with the apparent risks now, I'm looking forward. I would say health, safety, and well-being is going to be a key one, and we've touched on that. So, how do you keep in contact with a more disparate, a more broad-spaced workforce where you've got people in a whole host of locations? So it's looking at that, particularly managing not just physical health but mental health. Corporate real estate, how we go about managing that, what do we do? We've seen historically where we've had recessions, the two things that tend to happen, or the knock-on effect for our industry, are reduction in headcount and reduction in space. But each time those have happened in the past, slowly there's been this move back to people reoccupying offices. Will that change now? We don't know. Travel and how we're going to look at where we travel, how we travel, flexible working, but more importantly for the environments we're providing is what about the built environment quality? What is the quality of the environments we are now providing to ensure that people are not just productive, but they are healthy, they are safe within those environments? And where can we do that, not just to the benefit of the organization, but from a sustainable perspective as well? So it's not just looking at the elements such as energy, it's looking at the much broader aspects of how we go about managing what we have and how we make that more sustainable.
Very good, very good. Thanks, Greg. Just reading some of the other comments that are coming through. Simon Harding has made a very pertinent point of basically saying that organisations should not rush into reducing their portfolio. Basically saying that we need to look at how we can use the buildings better, and in the short term review leases so we can understand what needs to be done. We also need to understand the data, so that's coming through and reinforcing what Peter has said. If I can change the discussion now in relation to perhaps some of our support workers and the balance for the extra services that we might need in the workplace. How do FMs balance the need for extra cleaning and extra sanitation and extra hygiene around the workplace with the extra costs in terms of cash? That's a question from Paul Phillips. It might be one of your colleagues, Greg, but I won't put that one on you. Pete Nisbet, Managing Director of Mitie Energy. I mean, I know some of your colleagues from Mitie are absolutely flat out at the moment, doing extra services and providing some great work for the support workers. So how do you see this panning out in relation to what you described earlier as a commodity service?
So I think it's you've got to react, and you've got to be talking to the client all the time, and you've got to be able to kind of plan these spikes to a certain extent, and you've got to try and use innovation as well as much as you possibly can. So I think around all of these where you've got you have to have a very strong relationship with the client. You need to be listening to the client's concerns. You need to be understanding the timetables that clients are working to, and you need to be agile enough and dynamic enough to be able to react to those changes, and they will come kind of thick and fast from a variety of different directions. So, you know, I think with regard to kind of adapting to the new environment we find and the challenges that different industries will have, I would say it's about having the strength of relationship with a client, always being innovative and thinking of new ways to do things, and as I say, being very agile and dynamic in all of these areas.
Very good, very good. We've probably got about 10 minutes left of this webinar today, and I wanted to kind of move on in relation to repositioning and how do we reposition the sustainability agenda within the organisation. You all talked at the beginning about this being an opportunity, but if I could ask you all specifically, how do we reposition the sustainability agenda in the organisation? If you're talking to the CEO in the elevator, how do you hit them right between the eyes in relation to repositioning this sustainability agenda? If I could put Toby on the spot first, and then I'll go to Anne, Pete and Greg. So Toby, how do we really get this repositioned?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think, like we've mentioned previously, I think one of the key words is resilience. And you know what this awful situation at the moment has shown everyone that is we do lack resilience as an economy and as a society as well. So you know the effects of climate change are going to be, you know, could be even worse than the current situation, obviously over a longer period of time. But I think we really need to work that word resilience into a lot of the conversations, and saying, although lots of people's focus is on the current situation, climate change isn't going to go away, and we need to plan medium term, long term about how we can make our businesses, our buildings more resilient to the changes that are going to happen. But also, you know, framing it, we always at the Climate Group try and frame things in an optimistic way as well, and not being fatalistic, because that doesn't get anyone anywhere, and people tend to bury their heads in the sand. So seeing it as an opportunity, as a business growth opportunity, but also a way of kind of resetting and saying, you know, we've got all these systems in place, can we reset these and do anything differently? And like we've said before, having that data is really key as well, and having proper measurements systems in place. Like we said, the digitization of data and systems is going to be really key as well. So really trying to put a positive spin on, you know, the possibilities of net zero, of being carbon neutral, and having that green economic resurgence, I think is really key.
Okay, resilience, data, and making it into an economic opportunity. Greg, as chair of the IWFM Sustainability Group, how would you recommend we get this on the radar screen more?
Okay, thanks, Steve. I'm actually going to go back to the final paragraph of the last Sustainability in FM survey produced by the IWFM, and that states the importance of finding new approaches to sustainability is underlined by the latest report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which highlights once again the need for businesses to take urgent action to combat rising global temperatures. That's obviously now being polarized in all we've discussed with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic and the effect that can have. But the final paragraph then goes on to say the challenges for the FM sector to take the lead in combining this environmental challenge with the growing social and longer term economic agendas. If through providing clear definitions and measurements, initiatives are then delivered illustrating how these challenges can be met to the benefit of the organisation, it will also ultimately benefit society, the planet and the industry too. And I don't think anything's changed from that. That was over a year ago now, and I think as an agenda for moving forward, it's perfect for where we are now.
Very good, very good. So we'll refresh our minds on that report, Greg, and maybe republish that. Anne, any comments from yourself before I go to Peter?
I would just sort of completely agree with what Toby has said about resilience, and that's obviously something that's really, really important. And I would hope also that any CEO would be looking out to see what other CEOs are doing that are showing leadership. And I mentioned earlier about, you know, the investment community are signalling where their interest is going. Other CEOs have shown their commitment. But also, I think there's the impression that this has to cost more. There is considerable cost savings that can also be achieved. So, and also there's a greater opportunity to deliver better value to your customers. So there's many different arguments. Go back to the traditional triple bottom line approach. There's many different arguments that should help get a CEO's attention. And I would just challenge them on what metrics they think business success is now measured, because I don't think it's purely financial anymore. And I think every CEO would want to ensure that their business remains resilient and remains able to meet what customers are looking for.
And final comments from you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, so I guess if I had the time in the lift with the CEO, it would be very much about kind of just a bit of a myth buster around the assumptions that we can, you know, everybody can get to their targets with their eyes closed. You know, the sleepwalking analogy I used earlier, and yeah, making sure that people are very much on point about the fact that they need to have a plan and be following that plan and make sure they go through those gates to hit the targets, you know, on a monthly basis, and making sure that it's got the senior engagement. I'd also make the point that, you know, we talked about the you know, winning the hearts and minds and being able to show the evidence of the success stories that have happened. You know, we've seen it over the lockdown period of some of the significant savings we've seen coming out of buildings when we put them into hibernation, around about 35% reduction in energy usage over those periods away from the normal BAU. So making sure everybody's aware of those stories to a certain extent, those business cases, and really delivering those and showing what the new norm can be and how effective a coordinated approach can be.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Peter. It's almost 1 o'clock. We had an hour for this webinar. I just wanted to do a wrap up and also just look at some of the other comments that have come in, and we've had so many questions and comments in the past hour. It's just impossible to kind of go through them all. But I just wanted to pick out a few, perhaps for future discussion, for future debate, and also for all of us to reflect on. Manufacturers, maybe many of the manufacturers are now going to 24/7 production to keep up, so that's going to have an impact on the environment. Michael from Botswana talked about the additional chemicals that are going to be used with sanitizers, making sure that they're all climate sensitive. Another comment came in about recognizing and rewarding staff that can't work from home. It's all very well for us to say, let's all work from home, but many engineers, many cleaners, many people in the support services are actually required at the workplace, at the hospital, at the care home. So how do we reward and recognize those people? An extra challenge, working from home, the additional energy, working from home, longer periods, so people's energy bill is going to go up as much as anything. So how do we recognize that? And the final one I'll mention is from my colleague on the IC, Ed Baldwin, who mentions about lessons learned from a contractual perspective. I think many contracts are very rigid in the FM market, and at the moment we're asking many of our service providers to go the extra mile and be very, very reactive and very proactive. And in those situations we often say, let's forget about the contract, but where the contract's very rigid, it's very hard to accommodate the flexibility that's required. And I think Ed Baldwin, we need to have a separate discussion on how do we make our contracts more flexible. But just wrapping up, just wanted to thank our 4 panelists, and also, as I mentioned at the start, Nigel Luca, who's helped put all of this together. I think the key messages are from our panelists that FM and workplace professionals are absolutely uniquely placed to drive this agenda forward. We're the glue in the organisations. I think we heard that right at the start from Greg Davies, how this collaboration between the many different departments, we are the glue of marrying not only those departments, but the needs of owners, occupiers and the supply chain to keep the workplaces productive and from a well-being perspective. I think there's a huge opportunity to return to the workplace and make sure that the strategies add value and benefit all the users and the organisations alike. I think today IWFM has launched a new sustainability hub, which brings together a body of work, and the Institute's been doing a lot in this area of recent years. So please have a look on the website under the sustainability agenda, and there'll be lots more information there. So finally, a big thank you to all of our guests today for participating in today's webinar. A big thank you to everybody that's joined, several hundred people from around the world. I know we've had, as I mentioned, Ireland, Botswana, Middle East, Australia, where it's probably late in the evening, so thanks for staying up if you're down under, wherever you might be. Happy World FM Day to everybody, and keep the FM and workplace flag flying. It's in these times of crisis that people really do recognise the value that FM brings to organisations. So on that note, I'll close the webinar. Thank you very much to everybody again, and keep safe. Thank you.